Good.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you. Okay, so we can go ahead and get started. I'm going to get my document up really quick. Okay. Great. Welcome, everybody. I would like to call to order the October 15, 2020 Governance Committee meeting. I hope everyone joining us tonight is doing well and in good health. We continue to meet via Zoom for all district and board meetings. I will go over the procedures right now. Let me just pull up my agenda very quickly again because I cannot find. Just had it up here, and when I clicked on the Zoom to get to the meeting, it disappeared. Okay, here we are. Okay, so Mr. Duffy, can we please have roll call?
Yes. President Hernandez, can you hear me? President Hernandez Jarvis.
Present.
Trustee Panis.
Here.
And I am here too.
Great, thank you so much. And I noticed that Trustee Cotton Blake is also here with us. And I believe that Trustee Garcia Avila will also be joining us today. Great, and thank you to community members. Welcome. Thank you to community members for joining us today for this meeting. I hope my workroom doesn't look too messy. My daughter took the liberty to decorate everything and write on the walls and tape up all of her TK materials. So I apologize if there's a lot of things going on in the background. So I want us to get started with the approval of the agenda first of all. I had a suggestion and I was wondering if Trustee Panas had any suggestions as well.
I have no suggestions.
Okay, so I was wondering if I can get more input from Trustee Panas and Mr. Duffy about item D, not D, I'm sorry, 2C. So that discussion item suggested edits to the naming of facilities policy. I noticed that the draft policy for renaming school mascots already included that, and I wanted to know if Trustee Panas or Mr. Duffy could either confirm, clarify, or share if they see it differently, because it kind of looks like it's like it would be redundant to see them separately, but maybe there's a reason for that.
I think the items are listed separately because we had been potentially talking about them separately. I think we could, if I'm understanding you correctly, I think we could take them together, because what I did based on the feedback from the last meeting was to create a proposed board policy that had both facilities and mascots in it. So it was one policy that we could look at, which would basically deal with both of those agenda items. So I'm not sure if that's what you're asking, but that's what I created, was one that sort of talks both. Basically, it's about renaming, whether it's a facility or a mascot. Naming and renaming.
Thank you for clarifying. Trustee Panas, did you want to add anything?
I don't have anything further to add there. I am okay with this. If we can make it work, I've got no problem with it whatsoever.
Okay, thank you both. So we can leave the agenda as is then. I don't have any other suggestions for it. Is there a motion to approve the agenda as is?
So moved.
Seconded, can we please take a vote?
Panis, yes.
Blake?
Cotton Blake, yes.
Great.
Panis, yes.
Thank you, Trustee Panas. Hernandez Jarvis, yes. This motion passes 3 votes yeses unanimously to adopt the agenda as is. And now we have the approval of minutes from the September 17, 2020 meeting.
I reviewed the minutes and I did not have any issues with them at all. I'd like to move approval.
I second that motion to approve the set of minutes from the September 17th Governance Committee meeting. Can we please take a vote?
Cotton Blake, yes.
Panis, yes.
Hernandez Jarvis, yes. Motion passes unanimously to approve the set of minutes from the September 17th Governance Committee meeting. And now we have public comment, and I want to share the same information about how to engage with public comment in the governance committee meeting. So members of the public, committee members and the superintendent will be on video throughout the meeting. Staff members are also present and will be on video whenever they're speaking or presenting. Members of the public will not be on video and will be muted throughout the meeting except for public comment when they have raised their hand via Zoom. In order to comment on an agenda item at tonight's governance committee meeting, members of the public should raise their hand by pressing the raise your hand button on the Zoom app or by pressing *9 on your telephone if you're calling in. When your name is called, press *6 to unmute your phone. In order to be recognized to speak, you must be using a first and a last name. Thank you. So this would be for general public comment. And Mr. Duffy, will you be in charge of public comment today, or Mr. Jordan?
Sure, I can do that. Also, Mr. Jordan, if we could make sure Trustee Garcia Avila is promoted to panelist.
Great. Thank you.
Great. All right, we have one public comment right now, and it's Jamil Saleh. And you may unmute and go ahead.
Oh, thank you. This school district's website has several locations where meetings can be posted, the agenda or just the date. The main district website does not have this meeting listed as of right now. One location did have the agenda posted within before 72 hours. There were other locations that did not get updated within that time frame. I'm concerned about ongoing conversations without information being provided to the public to review. As I look at this agenda tonight, the first discussion item seems to be complete. It has the proposed, has the original, it has the proposed, there's a description about what's going on. All of these other items seem to be missing in some of the information, whether it's the draft under item B that's not listed anywhere, or the suggested edits under item C that's not listed everywhere. If they're combined together, as Mr. Duffy was just speaking, that combined document has not been posted anywhere for public review or input in for this meeting. Item D has the actual bylaw posted, but no description of what the discussion or potential amendments or edits would be. Item E says district holidays with no description at all. I'm not sure how the action item would be, go through the entire process with no information, no material provided. As I understand, this action would probably go to the board, but it went through this committee without ever being presented. And what I'm referring to is whatever this proposed council will be, there's been nothing but this one sentence, not even a description. And so at this committee, I believe it went to the actual board before coming to this committee, but this committee has not seen that document to be publicly commented on. And the very last, next governance committee, I'm not sure why it has to always be to be determined. I would like to ask that there be the second Tuesday, the third Thursday, whatever it be, would be a great guideline, even if it has to be changed, sometimes through the year. So I see improvement in how things are getting presented, but I have to say that we should be reaching for something higher than the Brown Act. 72 hours is the minimum for the agenda, but the posting of this meeting was also 72 hours. The superintendent's letter to the board from October 2nd identified this meeting, but the public calendar, the way that during these COVID Zoom times, we're only going to be doing it through the internet. If the website has too many locations to list, I suggest deleting some of them. Streamline it. If it's too much for staff to follow up in 4 places, it does seem kind of ridiculous. But to have it listed in one place and think that that's in full compliance while it's still quite misleading to have other information on the website concurrently is a problem. I'd like the school board, I'd like the governance committee to create some policy to help all of the other committees be in compliance during this COVID situation. And so I think 72 hours is the minimum, and hope that we can get better than that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Saleh. I think you made a lot of important points that we're definitely going to take into strong consideration for the next meetings that we have together in governance. Thank you. I think that Mr. Saleh did bring up a lot of important information, and I think that it would be great, Mr. Duffy, if in preparation for the conversation that we'll be having for the action item, if that can definitely be screen shared, even though it's been seen by the full board. I think that it's still important to include it in this and to have it in the minutes as well for public review. Thank you. Is there another hand for public comment?
Yes.
Welcome,
we
Trustee
have-
Garcia Avila. Sorry.
We Don Gosney.
Great. Thank you.
Right.
Thank you very much. I wasn't going to speak until I just heard what he had to say, and I've got to agree almost entirely with everything that he pointed out. You know, it's very difficult to come up with public websites where the public can actually find things. If you know what you're looking for, it may not be too difficult. Not simple, but just not as difficult. On this particular meeting, I know to scroll down, look on the right side where it says committees, and then find the right committee to look at. But if you don't know that, it can be more difficult. But when I look at the agenda with the items that are going to be discussed or voted on, all too often, not just this meeting, but so many of the meetings, including the regular board meetings, how are we supposed to know what kind of comments that we're going to offer when we have to wait for the presentation just to hear or see what's being discussed? I mean, the alternative to that is for us to sign up to everything in advance, and then if we get called saying, no, never mind. It's so much more helpful if the items are put out there for us to know what you're going to be discussing and what kind of items, what the information is, so that we can make informed discussions. It would be very helpful on that. And I said, well, I'm not going to belabor this, but any help that can be given on this. And I remember, it is very helpful if we know in advance when the meetings are going to be. We have calendars. Now that we're doing everything on the computer, I'm looking over in the left-hand corner, I've got my calendar button, and I see all the meetings that I've got, because many of us are community activists. That's our official designation. And we don't just work on school board items. We're doing city items, church items, union items. Our calendars are full. And so it's very helpful if we're able to know in advance when we're going to have governance meetings, when we're going to have facilities meetings, when we're going to have CBOC meetings or board meetings. You know, that's just the school district. Now let's go over to the cities. Let's go over to the others. So having a calendar would be helpful. This TBA, it's like the school district thinks that they're the center of the universe, and you're really not. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Gosney. Do we have any other public comments?
Not at this time.
Okay, thank you. Again, thank you. We will take those comments into consideration, and when we schedule the next meetings today at the end of the meeting, we can talk about the next 2 or 3 meetings that we will have. Thank you. Okay, so now we have our first discussion item. Item A, proposed bylaw revision, board bylaw 9150 regarding student board members.
Yes, and I believe that has an attachment, and that is also attached for the full board pending further discussion here. So I'm wondering, Mr. Jordan, are you able to bring that up for us?
Could you repeat that, Mr. Duffy? Your audio.
Yeah, and please let me know if I think I've been having some internet difficulty today. Mr. Jordan, are you able to bring the attachment up from the agenda, the bylaws? Great. Thank you. So we had some discussion our last meeting about this. We've had some discussion previously. And so we've made some additions and deletions to the bylaw around student board members, and that's what's in front of you this evening. You see the major changes out are for a term of 1 year instead of 1 semester.
Thank you, Mr. Duffy. And before we have a discussion, and I would like for Trustee Panas and I to ensure that the student representatives begin the discussion if possible, if that's okay with Trustee Garcia Avila and Trustee Cotton Blake. So if we can have public comment, and Mr. Duffy, that's the only revision that I'm seeing as well on that first page. And if members of the public are ready to share their comment with us on this specific item, if we can have them go first, and after public comment, then we can start the discussion.
President, he's back.
Okay. Sorry about that. I may have tried to get on a different network if I can.
Thank you.
So why don't I turn it over to you all? I think I've just introduced it and framed it. And I do see, and if I freeze or, Mr. Jordan can help with public comment. I do see Mr. Gosney's hand still up. I don't know if it's for this item on student board members. If it is, we can go ahead and hear that public comment and then get into a discussion and direction. If it's not, Mr. Gosney, just take your hand down. We'll know it's not for this item. But if it is, you can unmute and speak.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, I am speaking on this issue. I wish that I was able to participate in your governance meeting when this first came up, but community activist that I am, I had a conflict of multiple meetings at the same night. I think it's great to invite student participation in district events. And I have to say, keep in mind, I've been attending school board meetings for many decades now. The batch of student representatives that we've had over the past year are truly outstanding. And that's great. But in the past, we haven't always had some outstanding ones. Some of them, it was kind of obvious that they're just there because it looks good on their college application. And so we can't base things just on the 2 that we have now or the 2 that we've had immediately before them. But what I want you to do is to just remind the governance subcommittee that we need to stay focused on the main purpose of the board meetings, and that is to conduct the business of the board. Meetings have long gone on beyond a reasonable time and inviting more participants a chance to speak on every item, plus opening, closing, and the opening and closing statements, plus standing reports. It adds even more time to the length of these meetings. A minute here and a minute there, you say, well, that's not much, but you do it on every item and start adding it up. Next thing you know, we're talking 25, 30, 40 minutes. And when you've started adding 2 more additional board member or student board members. So just try to keep that in mind. Try to weigh the benefits of adding more members and inviting student participation, and compare that with what is that going to do to the meetings themselves, and the fact that we're having to defer more items, or the items of importance are at 11:30 at night. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Gosney.
It looks like the end of comment on this item.
Thank you. So if we can begin discussion with Trustees Cotton Blake and Trustee Garcia Avila.
All right, thank you. So on this matter, 2 things I noticed. I was not there when the changes were made to the piece of legislation regarding student board members, but what I would like to ask is, I saw the amendment made where it said from semester to year-long term. Does that apply to mine, Stephanie's current terms, or terms coming after ours?
That's a great question. I don't think we specified that. at the last meeting when we talked about this. Mr. Duffy, would you like to provide some insight into this?
We didn't specify. Usually what it would mean is it would be in effect at the moment of adoption, unless we specified this sooner. So let's say this was to go to the full board over the next few meetings before your term is up. It would, unless otherwise specified, mean that you would be with us until May. You could also decide, of course, on your own personal decision, right? You decided you wanted to do this for a semester, and that's what was established when you got on, and could choose whether you wanted to continue or not. I do think it would be helpful for us to hear from both of you about this, because it's one of the key changes. Initially, it was semester to semester. In order to have more student representation, more students would have the opportunity to kind of dip into the board and governance, learn about it, participate, maybe spark some further interest back at your school or in your life around governance, political leadership, etc. The downside is you get in and out pretty quickly. It takes a while to find a rhythm, figure it out. So I would love, if that's okay, trustees, to just hear a little bit more from our student trustees on this particular point, because it is a big one and a big change. And it also means we have to be really excellent in making sure we find our representatives, because, you know, if for some reason we can't, then we're empty for the year, not just a term. So I'll turn it back over to you, trustees, but I do think it would be, or President Hernandez-Jarvis, it would be good to hear from student trustees a little bit more about this change and their thoughts about it.
Thank you, Mr. Duffy, for clarifying that. And if I can, again, turn it over to Trustee Cotton Blake and Trustee Garcia Avila.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Duffy, for that explanation. That was very insightful to what I was wondering on that topic. Another comment I had / question was, what is the current status of the Youth Commission for West Contra Costa Unified School District? Because I was a member freshman and sophomore year, and I remember there was a period in which it got shaky and it sort of fell apart in a sense. And I'm wondering, as it says in the piece of legislation, that the Youth Commission decides who serves on the board. And I feel that having a strong Youth Commission would lead to having a strong board. So what would the current status of the Youth Commission be?
That's a really good question. I think it is in a little bit of flux, partly because we have been trying to establish a wider youth council, youth representation that goes beyond just the 6 comprehensive high schools. So we've been working on that with Tashaka Merriweather to create an all-student council that has representatives from every school in the district, and are trying to launch that through the Wellness Fridays this year. Technically, the Youth Commission still stands, and technically it's still, you know, under, I think its own bylaws is meant for high school students, right, specifically. So it's still there, but we haven't convened it this year, partially because of, I think, the overwhelm with COVID, and partially because we've been trying to hear voices from all of the schools, student voice from all schools. So I think it's an important question. I think partially we have to take that up too, and really decide, are we going to be able to keep both Youth Commission, you know, and maybe that needs to say Youth Commission or other youth Congress or representative body, right? So whatever we end up with, that we know it's still coming from there. But I appreciate that question, and it will help me turn back around to our team and really try to help figure out where we are with Youth Commission specifically.
All All right, thank you, Mr. Duffy. That's all the comments and questions I have for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Cotton Blake. Trustee Garcia Avila?
Okay, great. I think we should focus on youth commission from people from youth commission, but also people outside of youth commission. I know a lot of my friends would love to serve on the board, but they necessarily don't know what steps they take first. And I don't know, we should just branch out to people. I mean, this is a great opportunity. Being a trustee is a great opportunity to kind of just test the waters on what you want, you know? And just making that more accessible of knowing how to apply, or maybe just spreading out the word a little bit more is great. Also, like you said, it's nice to have more of a longer term because we necessarily don't have a lot of time on our hands. Time flies by so fast. I mean, I think it's been 2 months since Kaden and I both got elected or whatever. And that it's been so quick, and I haven't fully been acknowledging of this space, and I don't know, it's kind of like too good to be true in a sense. So definitely having a year-long term sounds great. I would totally take advantage of that if I'm being completely honest. But yeah.
Thank you, Trustee Garcia Avila. Trustee Panas?
Thank you very much, President Hernandez Jarvis. I'd like to thank Mr. Gosney for his comments, and Mr. Duffy, as well as Trustee Cotton Blake and Trustee Garcia Avila. I'm, first of all, just kind of been my assumption that if they were willing, that our current 2 students serving as trustees would continue until May, because then if we brought a couple more on, they could be in the role of mentors and role models for the new students. I just really value their input. It's very, very important. I'd also like to say that I know I said October to May at the last meeting. I was actually thinking, I don't know why I said that, because like November to May would be like 6 months. You know, if we went October to May, that's 5 months and then 7 months. So I'd actually suggest that we change this to be November to May. And I'd like to echo what Trustee Cotton Blake said, regarding the Youth Commission, because like I have been the board member who's been on the Youth Commission, and that was how we met him. And we didn't meet last year. I guess, no, that's not, we had a couple of meetings last year, but the commission didn't really move forward. And so Mr. Duffy's suggestion, like we say, other district youth body, I would be fine with that. And as long as all parties are agreed to essentially what that means, I don't know that we have to specify that any further. We're just trying to cast a wide net. And to the extent we can get students from all of our schools and kind of every possible demographic class, that strengthens our board in my mind. So if we have other sources for students that are district bodies, I think that would be very helpful. I don't know how exactly, I'm not quite prepared as like, how are we gonna make that final decision? But like, we've always had a little bit of a problem with a pipeline of students. So I would hope that we can come up with a solution here and bring it forward to the board. And, there has been talk, I know that Trustee Vasquez-Sumala had been very interested in getting the Youth Commission kind of going again. I would certainly want to support that. And it's one of my greatest joys was being the board representative on the Youth Commission. So I think that covers all my comments. I just like my main substantive comment about what's written on the piece of paper right now is I really think it ought to be November rather than October, so we have 2 equal terms. And the other thing is just like, I would just love it if our 2 current student board members continued on through May.
Mr. Panis, Can I
Yes.
just ask a clarifying question?
Sure.
So you're suggesting that 2 student board members are going to start a term in November, and they're going to serve that term to May.
Well, actually, the 2 who start in November, I would actually, if I was not clear, I'd suggest they serve until the next November. And like, something that we're actually doing here is, it's interesting. We're kind of excluding seniors from the process, because if a senior started in November, they would sort of, I guess, suppose they could stay on even if they graduated, but they'd kind of be done in May. They wouldn't go the whole year, and then we'd have another problem there. And people who start in May, obviously, those shouldn't be seniors either. So did that answer your question, Mr. Duffy? And I also added some more thoughts there.
So you'd have two board members, student board members, starting in November, going for a year.
Yes.
And then in May, there would be two board members elected. So basically, from May to November, you'd have that set of 4 people, right?
Right.
And then in November, 2 new come on, and then in the May, 2 more new come on.
Yes,
In
that's
some
my
way, kinda
vision.
like-
Yes.
Sort of like our adult board members have that sort of
Right.
cycle.
Yes, exactly so.
What do the student trustees think about this?
Trustee Garcia Avila?
I think it's cool, to be honest. I would love to serve another year. I don't know about Caden, but I would love to.
I would love to as well. While I'm here again, there's a lot of stuff that I hope to get done with you all. So I look forward to another year as well.
And what do you think of this sort of overlap concept? So
The mentorship idea to the next trustees. It sounds good to me.
it does mean, you're right, Mr. Panis, a senior would have to bow out unless they were encouraged to be the ones who did the May to May kind of thing from their junior year.
Right.
Yeah, but we haven't, well, actually, you guys are seniors.
They are
right?
seniors.
Yeah, we haven't had seniors in quite some time, it feels like, on our board. Or
I think Ms. Ochoa was a senior.
Mr.
Yeah.
Choa, yeah.
All right, so maybe I have that wrong.
And
It's
Mr.
all,
Linares also.
yeah, it's all a good mix.
So then I have a question about this. So if it's from May to May, and I think I missed that, and if it's from November to November, so the November to November would be covered. It can be a senior, a junior. If it's May to May, then that would be when it's a senior. If it's a student who's a senior at that point, it wouldn't, because they would graduate in June. So then we would be trying to reach out to juniors to
That's
participate.
correct.
Okay.
And I'd also suggest that, I guess, even for the November term, I wouldn't really want to be encouraging seniors. Not that we don't have seniors who are like terrific kids, be great board members, but like, I want them to serve the whole year. And I want them, to be around to serve the 6 months from May to November, so they can then mentor and work with the new students who come on then.
I have a comment as well on this. I think as a part of our positions as student trustees, we should be doing some more with outreach for these positions as well. Because I know a lot of people at my school, many people at El Cerrito High School who would love to have a position like this and would make large steps in our district who don't currently know about it. And it's not as advertised or marketed as many other things here. So as students, I think a large part of it would be for us to reach out and find people who would be interested in said positions.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Trustee Panas and Trustee Cotton Blake. I think that the conversation about accessibility and publicizing this and not just using the Youth Commission as a way to recruit students for these, positions. I think that reaching out to, amending that so it says, student population, student body, other district youth group would enable for other students who may not otherwise participate in the Youth Commission or a process like that to have the doors open to lead and to serve on the board. So I'm in agreement with these changes as suggested through this conversation.
Okay, so that would mean we would bring this to the full board potentially as, we could either bring it as an action item from the at the next governance committee just to memorialize and vote on it, that you do want to bring it to the full board. That's Mr. Panis, remind me, that's pretty much how we've been doing all of our items, right? We do vote officially that it's going to go 2-0 to the
right, or 1-1 or whatever the vote is. Yes.
So let's bring it for an action item in November. We'll vote on it, and if the vote is affirmative, we'll move it to the full board.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Bennett.
Okay, so we are through that one.
Thank you, board members, for the discussion and conversation. And so now we're moving on to discussion item B, draft policy for renaming school mascots.
Right. And so B and C sort of flow together. So we'll talk about them together. And I understand from public comment earlier that this entire naming facilities board policy 7310 was not posted 72 hours ago. We continued to put some tweaks on it. So we'll talk about it today. Once it is, if it's going for action, it will definitely be up on time. So can we pull that up, Mr. Jordan? Do you have a copy of that? Great. So let me share a little bit about what I did based on the discussion from the last meeting. So this now says naming of facilities and mascots. So it's got them both there. And so you can see some of the red just adds mascots each time. I did add a number 4, which we can discuss. There was criteria for selecting names and mascots, but the criteria was actually just numbers 1, 2, 3, and what was number 5 and 6. And so I thought it might be nice to have a little bit of guidance on what we're looking for. And I saw this in a couple other board policies. So I put some language to number 4, pretty broad: leaders, artists, authors, poets, historical figures, and other extraordinary citizens who have impacted the fields of education, the sciences, the arts, civic leadership, and or have a specific cultural or regional connection. I was going to say impact as well. Sorry, regional connection / impact to the West Contra Costa community. So it doesn't have to be some big named hero. It could be an ordinary citizen who made an impact on our community as well. So just trying to find some language to share there. We can come back to that. We also talked about taking out renaming under extraordinary circumstances. So I took that out. I did add a clear rationale must be given as to why a change to mascot or school is proposed, just so we have some, idea why this is happening, not just a whim. And then some language there around how we would do that renaming when a school community has made a determination that they would like to explore renaming of a school and or mascot. The school principals, I guess we could say principal, will appoint a naming committee of parents, staff, and students The naming committee will develop a ballot, and it just goes on a little bit on process. And that's it. And that should say, sorry, the naming committee will count ballots and determine the winning
Mascot.
Sorry, it should say the winning
Name.
facility name and or mascot, and it also should say to be what's the word I'm looking for, to be nominated to the board subcommittee, right? That needs a finish there, right? So it goes through a
Right.
school process.
Yeah.
The school does all their work, they vote on it, and then that goes to the board subcommittee to affirm it or deny it. So I can clean that up a little bit too.
Great, thank you for the introduction, Mr. Duffy. Do we have public comment for this item?
Could we keep that up? I think we might want to reference it where we can. Thank you.
So let's go to public comment before we have.
Oh, yes. Thank you for the reminder. We've got Don Gosney and Jamil Sali are two public comments on this item.
Thank you.
Mr. Gosney, go ahead when you're ready.
Thank you again for giving me an opportunity to speak. Unfortunately, my comments are based on the document we're seeing and not the document that you just rewrote 2 seconds ago. As the renaming committee consists only of people directly affiliated with the school, to the exclusion of the rest of the community. You're talking about parents, you're talking about staff, you're talking about students, but you're completely excluding the many, many tens of thousands of us here in the district that get to pay for these schools, that get to live around these schools. You're sending a message, your voice doesn't matter to us. I'm also concerned that the committee to discuss the renaming of schools and mascots, the language, again, only determines renaming mascots. You know, that's that red paragraph at the beginning or at the bottom of page 1 and the top of page 2. You know, you amended it just a little bit because it starts off talking about schools and mascots, and then it talks only about mascots. But now, and I would like to see better language in there that firms up. Does the committee have the final say? Does the policy, it does not allow for community input at all? This policy does not allow input from the elected board members even. And the policy does not give elected board members final say over renaming. It says that committee gets to decide whether to rename the school or the mascot. That seems awfully strange. I elected school board members. I sure didn't elect a parent. I didn't elect a student on that. But also there's a concern over renaming a school after a living person. And I'm conflicted over this one because I fully support the renaming of the school from that racist Woodrow Wilson to Michelle Obama. But at the same time, I've seen abuses here in the city of Richmond where the people that were running the city council were renaming parks, streets, benches, and other things after their friends who were still living. And it wasn't with the consent of the full populace, it was just their small little group on that. So, I mean, a lot of times, like the federal government, you have to be dead for 5 years before your name can even come up for consideration for naming an aircraft carrier or a park or something like that. There ought to be some sort of consideration for that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gosney.
Mr. Sali? And please correct me if I'm not pronouncing that right.
Hi, I would like to suggest that the school board itself have an annual meeting one meeting a year dedicated to this topic. And all of the schools that either want to change the facility or want to change a mascot, they have a specific time that they can get their request in. There's a full forum. There's got to be a line item to identify how much this is going to cost. I don't know if the people who want to rename it would want to do it the same if they found out how much it costs to change a field or to change the floor of a basketball court. And so I would like to see this be more of a whole process for the district. I think there are a lot of people that want to have this discussion, and to say that each school has to muster up all of this on their own, I think would do a disservice to each community. And so I think that mascots and facilities should be identified separately, because one will get requested a lot more than the other. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Saleh. Is that it for public comment?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Duffy. So if we can begin our discussion again, if our
Could
board
I
members
ask
can
one
have a
more thing?
discussion beginning
Sorry.
with Trustee Garcia Avila. Mr. Duffy?
Just a clarification. So I did not put it in the document here. So again, and I need to articulate that, or we need to articulate that the board subcommittee then makes a recommendation to the full board, as we did with Obama. So that may be implicit, but we need to make it explicit here in the language.
Thank you for clarifying that.
Yep.
Trustee Garcia Avila?
Yeah, thank you. I also do believe that we should have 2 different documents for each thing. So naming facilities and mascots both require 2 different things. The steps that I'm going to take to rename a facility is not going to be the same steps that I'm going to retake to name a mascot. Even if they do share some similarities, there's a difference that both derives them in separate ways. So yeah, that's just my comment.
Thank you, Trustee Garcia Avila. Trustee Cotton Blake?
Yes, thank you. The only thing, I also completely agree with what Stephanie just brought up regarding the 2 separate pieces of legislation regarding each individual subject. One thing I'm noticing here is when they say the living or deceased, the only issue I find in saying the living is that leaves a lot of room for error. And what I mean by that is in the decisions a person can make from the time where they've done something pivotal to the point where they would be added as the name of a facility or a mascot. In that same lifetime period afterwards, if they commit something that is not favorable in the public eye, then you are at a fiscal problem as well as a public dispute issue if you have an individual that does not represent what your school or facility or mascot represents. And that's that room for error I'm speaking of in a person's life when giving a name to someone who is currently living.
It's a good point. It's a
Thank
good point.
Thank you, Trustee Cotton Blake. Trustee Panas?
Thank you very much, President Hernandez-Jarvis. So I'd have to say I appreciate our students giving their opinions here. And to me, to be honest, I'm not exactly sure how the 2 would be different, but all along I've been conceiving of them as different. And I think there's a benefit to having them different, particularly if we feel like we might be needing to change one and not the other, etc. I certainly appreciate the comments of the speakers and Mr. Duffy as well for clarifying. I think that, that however, whenever a site-based committee decides to change the name, it needs to go to the board subcommittee, and that needs to go to the board for approval. I'm thinking, about the suggestion here that this happen once a year. And to be honest, my concern, I like that idea in many ways, but if there's 6 schools lined up who want to do this, that meeting could go for 12 hours. So that's a concern for me. Trustee Cotton Blake made a good point regarding living people, but at the same time, I mean, I was so thrilled when the Wilson community came up with Michelle Obama that I would kind of hate to say we can't take a really meaningful name like this and apply it to a school. And everybody at Obama is so excited that they have that name. So I would have to say I come down the side of leaving, making it either living or deceased is fine with me. I don't know that I have any other major comments about the proposal. Oh, I'm sorry. Mr. Gosney made a really good point about I feel like it would be great if we include the broader community in this. Now, in the case of the city of Richmond, do we invite the entire city? Do we invite the neighborhood council? Do we invite all the businesses? I don't have an answer. I don't know what the answer to that is, but I think it's appropriate to at least give them, the community, a voice in the process. Not that there isn't public comment, et cetera. I'm just wondering if somehow we need to, when, in the large red paragraph inside of the nomination process section of the bylaw, is to explicitly include somehow community members on that, but then we come up with the question of like, which community members? So I don't know if we leave it the way it is and just make it clear that we expect the school community to be reaching out and letting the entire community know that this is happening so that anyone can weigh in. So those are my thoughts right now on this.
Thank you, Trustee Panas. Thank you to each trustee for sharing your opinion. Thank you to Trustee Garcia Avila and Trustee Cotton Blake for sharing honestly what your perspective is on this specific policy. And I appreciate the comment about splitting these into two, keeping them one facilities policy and one as a mascot. And also thinking about the piece of how to rename a school after someone who's living, and the implications of what that could be. And I think that it's helpful. I think that, not just during an extraordinary circumstance, there can be a clear rationale for why a name needs to be changed. So if something was to happen to a school that is named after someone who is living, and then when we find ourselves that the school community doesn't identify with that, with that person that the school was named after, then the process can begin, I think, to rename the school after someone that does represent those values in that school community. So I think that having this policy would help us to address that if that was the case, and I think that's a valid concern. And I also want to reiterate what Mr. Gosney said about community involvement. I think that for the process that we did with the formerly Wilson school community, and now the Michelle Obama Elementary school community, I think that we had their site committee was working on it. They were the ones that were leading it, that did all of the work, and then it was brought to us, for the board to have a subcommittee to appoint board members to then serve, and then go through the process of community input, and then after that to bring the official recommendation to the board. And a lot of community members did show up that were not parents and who have just been in the communities for a long time. And they spoke. And so I think that memorializing that in the policy and saying that there will be a process for clear community involvement will be helpful in both policies, I think, for the mascot and for the facilities renaming policy, because I think just calling that out will make sure that there's a community involvement piece attached to this process, to both processes. That's all I have to say for this one. I would like for us to revisit it at our November governance meeting and bring
President Hernandez-Jarvis, I have one more thought that I forgot to mention.
Go ahead,
at the last meeting, I mentioned it, and Mr. Sella also mentioned it tonight, and that is the potential cost of doing this. And we certainly have some school communities where it would be easy for them to bear the cost. And I mean, if we're just talking about the citizens as opposed to the school paying for it, but even for the school paying for it, and other schools where that could be really challenging. And I don't actually have a brilliant answer to this, but
I
please,
thought
Mr. Duffy,
about,
yes.
I thought about that, and in reading a number of other schools, I was reading about a high school that was redoing their entire mascot that was a Native American mascot, right? And it was a large high school, and they thought it would cost a few $100,000 to, you know, redo the gym floor, redo the field, redo the uniforms, redo everything. So I was trying to figure out what the right language is. Maybe it is at the site level or at the subcommittee level, you know, the group will consider or include a, you know, budget projection for cost of changing, right? You know, I think if you're at like a very small elementary school, it's not going to be as big of a deal. But if you're at a comprehensive high school and that's the entire identity of a school, and it's plastered on everything, that's going to be a bigger deal.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that question.
Costlier deal, I should say. So, I mean, if you would like, I can, you know, as I clean up the language based on everything that's been talked about today, I can include something about ensuring there's some type of budget recognition there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So what I'm hearing is 2 separate resolutions. Policies, excuse me. I'm looking down at my notes. Clarifying we're going to the subcommittee to the full board. Some language about reaching out to the wider community. And I think those were the major, and the budget, those were the major items that I have here.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. So next meeting, 2 separate policies coming back on action.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Great. Thank you, trustees. And thank you to members of the public too for your feedback. So now, since we just finished talking about discussion item B, draft policy for renaming school mascots, the next item, item C, is suggested edits to the naming of facilities policy. And we just talked about that very same subject. So then that would actually mean that our next item is discussion item D, board bylaw 9322, agenda meeting materials.
Yep. And I know that was asked to be on the agenda. We haven't had discussion, or we didn't have discussion at the last governance, I don't believe. So this is the first time. We've obviously talked about this before over the years. We've made some adjustments to this policy over the years. So we have the policy to look at, and then just need to know what and where the trustees want to go with this and want to consider making adjustments.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Duffy. Trustee Panas, would you like to give an overview so that then we can have public comment?
Certainly. We've heard a lot of concern about the fact that, yeah, we heard it this evening, but I'm thinking about this more in terms of the board at this moment, about materials for board meetings, changing after they've been posted, not appearing until the last minute. And so I've been trying to think, and I've actually written a few sentences that we can talk about later if we choose to do so, depending on how the conversation goes. But like, what should our standards be for when can attachments be changed or added to our agendas for regular meetings and for special meetings? And then also, equally important in my mind is making sure the public knows that those things have changed. Because, you know, typically, I'll just speak from my own personal experience. I go out and I download everything on Friday night, and I work on getting it printed, et cetera, and I'm doing analysis, et cetera. And sometimes, someday on Tuesday or Wednesday, I'll find something's changed, or I'll be sitting in a board meeting and saying like, well, why is this staff person talking about slide 23? Or I notice it says slide 23, and in my presentation, it's slide 20. Like, what got added? What got subtracted? And I know I'm not the only person who feels this way. So I would like us to be thinking about proper notice whenever we change either the agenda, most importantly, but when an attachment is added or changed. So that's one thing that I wanted to get people's thoughts on. The other is that in our district, I feel like we've never really had the culture of immediately bringing forth to the public when we get any kind, whether it's a standard audit or a special audit or some kind of finding of a program review. Those should, in my mind, so in my opinion, those should be coming forward immediately to the public. And as I thought about how to do that, you know, there's a couple of natural ways that I'd be happy to suggest after we hear from the public. If the public has thoughts about this, or the other board members or president or if you certainly do. But I've got some specific ideas at some point I'd be happy to put forward regarding both changes to attachments to the agenda and bringing forward in a very timely way any kind of audits or reports or other findings we get about the district, those going on the website and how we announce those.
Thank you, Trustee Panas, for that overview. And if we can have members of the public share right now their public comment, and then we will begin discussion. And Trustees Cotton Blake and Garcia Avila, if you would like any further clarifications or overview, would be happy to do that as well. Thank you.
We have two comments, Don Gosney and Jamil Sali.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Mr. Gosney.
Thank you once again, and I apologize for this, but some things were brought up in that last item and I couldn't add in information. When Korematsu was being renamed, it went out to the greater community for input, okay? But when Obama School, I only live 4 blocks away. I didn't find out about the renaming until it came before the board. So community input was not invited, not in the general school. But I just recently helped out John Gigliardi with the East Bay Express. He's doing an article about the renaming of Sir Francis Drake High School in Marin County, where they estimated $500,000 to rename the school. So there is a cost to these kinds of things. Now on this item itself, how are we supposed, as members of the public, how are we supposed to prepare comments on here? How are we supposed to lobby you one way or the other when we have absolutely no idea what in blazes you're going to be talking about on this? Just saying board policy. We have no idea what is on there. But I have to stand with Trustee Panis on there. Adding items at the last second or after it's been posted, how are we as a public, how are we supposed to know about that? I'm like Mr. Panis, I print out my things. I study them in advance when they come out. Just our joint meeting with the CBOC, which came out at 5 p.m. on Friday night. At 9:17 a.m. the next morning, I found out. Thank you, Miss Haney, for letting me know that an item had been added on there. And when I brought that up to staff, they said, oh, we do that all the time. It's not unusual for us to bring in presentations on the night of the board meeting. Well, how are we supposed to know about these things? How are we supposed to prepare when we don't know anything about it? You know, when you come up with an agenda packet 72 hours in advance, it should be locked in. That's it's been put your stamp of approval on there. Don't go changing things willy-nilly like that, because that goes right back to this distrust that the community has of our school district, where they just can't trust the board, they can't trust the staff because you keep doing things behind closed doors without telling them about it. You know, do something to help rebuild that trust, and which means when you put out an agenda packet, put all of the information on there so we can review it, and don't start changing it like we've seen so many times before. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gosney.
Mr. Sally? Mr. Sally, when you're ready.
Hello, yes. I wonder if this, the effort of looking at this board bylaw could be done along with the governance handbook getting updated, because it seems like a annual Brown Act training, you know, with the board members as well as with staff who's responsible for these meetings would be able to bring this together towards a unified resolution. Adding things after the 72 hours seems to be clearly not allowed. That's part like the basis of the Brown Act. And so I don't think we should be having a discussion about what can be. There is nothing, it can't, it shouldn't. To do so creates a unfair track record, because the record would reflect that this item was discussed, but we didn't go through the motions properly to have true input from the public. I think we should be striving towards much better than the minimum of what the law requires. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sally.
Well, I'd like to comment here. Is that all right?
Yes, please go ahead, Ms. Jeffy, and then we'll get started with our student representatives.
Oh, go ahead. We can go to students. Go ahead.
Did you want to clarify anything though before we begin discussion? Because I want to make sure that if there's anything that would be relevant.
No, I wanted to share some thoughts about this.
Okay, thank you. Trustee Garcia Avila and Trustee Cotton Blake.
I'd like to go at the end if you don't mind.
That's okay. Yeah, thank you. Trustee Garcia Avila.
Okay, maybe it just doesn't fit into this, but when we talk about agenda/meeting materials, I also think of like language, and how do we make it more accessible to our students and our community. I feel like a lot of the language on the agenda or the agenda attached has a lot of, you know, big words that we necessarily aren't exposed to. So how do we make that more accessible to our community and our students for them to also be aware of what's going on? And that's super important, especially for us trustees on the board. So that's my little comment.
Thank you, Trustee Garcia Avila. And that's a big comment. That's huge, because accessibility is key to all of this public engagement and to public board meetings. Thank you. Trustee Panas.
Thank you, President Hernandez-Jarvis, and I appreciate Trustee Garcia Avila's comments there. And we're making some progress there, although we still have a long ways to go. When we had our first interim presentation, there was actually in the back, there was kind of a long list of acronyms and terms that were defined. It's obviously a challenge if we have to, I guess it's not a challenge, it's an interesting question, like, do we attach some kind of glossary to every agenda that we have? I'm not gonna say that's a bad idea, and it might help make things more accessible. You know, I said I had some specific thoughts about this, and I'd like to share those right now. To me, you know, in theory, you know, we have, sorry, not theory, Board Bylaw 9322 says that presentations are supposed to be ready when the agenda is posted. And I know that there's plenty of times when maybe errors are found and stuff, you know, like sometimes I am sending a note to Mr. Duffy, oh, this is left out, you know, it's in the agenda, but, you know, or that one's not accessible, or this contract attachment has a social security number that shouldn't be there. But I'd like to propose that for regular meetings of the board, that attachments to the agenda cannot be added or changed until, I mean, I wrote 56 hours when I wrote my notes down, but that's like Monday morning. You know, we're not changing attachments to the agenda or adding after that. For special meetings, which have to be noticed at least 24 hours in advance, things shouldn't be added or changed 18 hours before the meeting. And then just as important, and I mentioned this before, is anytime something like that happens, anyone who's on the normal distribution list for the agenda should get notice of that. Now, I'm sure there's plenty of people who are not on the normal agenda list, and I don't really have a brilliant solution for those individuals, because obviously if they're going out and getting this stuff religiously or somewhat religiously for every other board meeting, they won't know via that proposed mechanism what to do there, but I'd certainly like to hear people's thoughts on that. The other half of this is, I mentioned during the introduction about various findings that we have. And to me, I would like to see, you know, normally at every board meeting, we have a superintendent's report. And I would just propose that whenever, you know, whether it's a standard compliance audit or it's a performance audit or it's a finding or it's, you know, whether it was any number of various reviews that we've had over the years, when we get those, I would like the superintendent in the superintendent's report to say, and we got the following items, and if we're planning to discuss them, say, I'm hoping to discuss this next month. I want to discuss that in February. And then those get posted on the district's website and perhaps the Friday memo or somewhere else. There's a link to those things, because I would just like us to be really open about all those things. I think that's the way that we improve because we just get, and Mr. Gosney mentioned it before, I believe, like we're always getting criticized for things we did or for things that we did not disclose. And I would just like us to have a really clear policy that says it's our business to disclose all this stuff, and we want to do that. So those are my thoughts on this subject.
Thank you, Trustee Panas. I think that when we were looking at this, board policy earlier as the board, the current board last year, it was really, I think there was a lot of contention about just how much needed to be in the policy and for what purpose, the impact on the budget, is essentially making it something that was restrictive, I think was one of the arguments that I heard. But I think that this policy helps to really guide the way that materials are posted, what is expected. And I would say that our contracts have improved because of that. We still have a ways to go, but I think that there has been a lot of improvement since then. I do think it is confusing, not just for the community, but also for board members ourselves when we're finding that information is updated or something is posted and we have 24 hours to review it or less. I know that I've mentioned that before too, when there's presentations. I work full-time, so I get, if there's something changed, I have a smaller gap of time to look at that and to look at that clearly and analyze it. And sometimes it takes me days to really get through something and then remember it, put my notes down on the things that I want to ask or comments I want to make. So it's a process of studying. And I think that to post something, for example, with the past budget, to have the item on a Friday, but then the actual presentation itself not up until a day before the meeting or even 2 days or within the 24 hours, I think it's just not enough time to really talk about it, to really figure out what it is that is the most important aspect of the presentation and what can add to the conversation and contribute to it and help us move forward. And so I think that it's a lot of, I know it's been frustrating, and I know, Mr. Duffy, that you've shared that sometimes staff doesn't find out information until later, or like that Saturday, or something is not ready to go by Friday. But I just really want us to strive for that, because I think that otherwise it seems like we post something on Friday, but then it's like we're gonna have the full attachment ready on Monday or Tuesday, so then we'll post it as soon as possible. But that always kind of creates the cycle of like, we're going to post the item on a Friday, and then we'll eventually get it on there as soon as possible. And I get that sometimes the information is not available until later on the Friday evening, but I would say that for that we plan in advance, so that if we, are not gonna make it for that specific meeting that the item was posted on, that then we say, okay, we're not going to have this item until the next regularly scheduled meeting, or have a special meeting for those items that didn't get that. And I think that would lead us to actually have the items only be posted when there's actually something ready for that too. And I think that this is just because it's an ongoing, observation. It's not something that's new or something that's only happened once or twice or even 3 times. It's been several times now. And I think that for the sake of accessibility, consistency, we should look into how to reinforce this policy to make it stronger for that. And Trustee Cotton Blake, if you would like to share your feedback, and then Mr. Duffy, if you want to kind of synthesize and maybe reflect on what you're hearing from us, and see how we can put this together.
All right, thank you. So I was thinking back to a point that Mr. Gosney made when he was doing his public comment on the topic. I was thinking about how the outreach works when it comes to the board bylaws, and how when there's a change made to an agenda, afterwards, how it is brought to the public's attention, or if it is at all brought to the public's attention on said changes made, or action items added, or things of that nature, so that members of the public are able to comment and present on said topics. Just if there's any kind of outreach on that stance at all.
Mr. Duffy?
Yes.
Are you, okay.
I think there's 2 things maybe to separate here. When we actually change the agenda, like put a new item on, we alert the entire sort of mailing list. I think the bigger issue that folks are talking about is the supporting materials and the attachments. And let me start by saying the staff does not want to be doing this last minute. It is the absolute last thing people want to be doing, is putting together PowerPoints at the last hour. So, if we say like, why does that keep happening? Why does that keep happening? It's just a capacity issue. And I don't know that folks have really sort of taken that seriously and maybe think it's something else. I mean, there's no other reason that all of it can't get done, except that all of it can't get done. So if we look at last week, for example, or this week, right? This week on Tuesday, there's a facilities committee and a DLCAP committee. On Wednesday, there's a safety committee. On Thursday, there's a governance committee. On Friday, we're going to post the agenda for the big board meeting next week, right? The amount of things that have to happen. Now there also has to be minutes from every one of those meetings. Those have to be reviewed. We went to a retreat last week, and I'm not sure that folks really heard him, but Carl Cohn talked very specifically about their structure in Long Beach, which was truly transformative, where the board meetings were an hour and a half. The committees were 3, and they dealt with more things in their quarterly retreats. And I think we have a habit of adding and adding, and we're not taking away. And we have to figure that out. Like, if you want to do one more thing, what's the one less thing that we're going to do? So I just think that it really comes down to capacity. If we're asked, on Wednesday at agenda setting, hey, we want this, we're going to try to say yes every time to get you that presentation, even though it has to be turned around in 2 days. So, I don't want that to sound like sour grapes. Whether it's me or your next superintendent, I really feel like folks are going to have trouble catching up to this many committees and this many asks and this many items on an agenda, which often takes us to 11, 12 o'clock at night. We have to figure out what's the most important so we can do it well. Nobody wants to rush. Nobody wants to be sloppy. Everybody feels terrible when they miss the Friday deadline. So that's what I would also encourage somewhere in this bylaw, that we can speak to prioritization somehow. What is the most important thing that needs to go on these agendas that we can deal with? Because yes, part of it is where people are over talking, we're talking too long at the board meetings, but part of it is there's too many items. So, I really hear it, and I hate the rush and I hate being late. But I think if you looked across how many committees we're trying to support, it's really difficult with all of the asks to get everything nailed perfectly 72 hours in advance. So we're going to keep working on it. We can be more strict about saying that that's coming off the agenda. We're not doing it. I hear that. Sometimes I think, that feels really disappointing and we don't want to do it. And we'd rather have the PowerPoint come a day later so we can actually talk about that item. So I'm open, to the suggestions, and I really do understand the frustration for sure.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, Mr. Duffy, for that. I think, I just want to make it clear that this is not in no way, I think talking about this policy is to get, to hurt people or to get to people's feelings, because I know that we're all running on short circuits, especially these days. I'm not saying that anybody needs to have more work put on them, but I just think that you're talking about efficiency, and I want us to get there too. If you do re-envision that we only need to have 3 committees officially across the board, that's something that can be a conversation. I think that's a really interesting idea that has merit, and I think that that's something that the board, the future board, can definitely pursue. I think that this week in particular too, that sometimes we have weeks that is just one thing after the other, after the other, after the other. Sometimes more weeks than not are like that. And this week does have that. But I mean, the safety committee, has it been meeting every month?
It's met the last few months, maybe had a month off here or there, but it's gearing back up to meet.
Okay.
I mean, even the next item, right? The racial oversight committee. Let's say we decide we're going to take that on. Mm-hmm. That's another body of work and piece of work, right? What comes off if you want to do that really well?
And we can do that one soon, yeah. But I want to finish sharing what I was mentioning. But I think that we have to balance efficiency with transparency. And I hear what you're saying, that a lot of staff are being at meetings, having to look at the minutes, having to do all of that work. So then how do we make these meetings more efficient, the ones that the committees have? And if you're gonna push the board to pursue that, I think that's fine. I think people would be open to the idea. I don't think there would be a lot of resistance to that. But I do want to say that a lot of the items that are in our agenda are brought by you and your staff. So then a lot of these are also items that are time sensitive. So to say that we're going to cut back on things, I mean, what are the things that, I'm trying to think, and I'm like, okay, I requested a DLI presentation like 3 months ago, right? 2 months ago. And I'm trying to think about what it is something that I requested specifically that wasn't time sensitive. But it looks like the majority of the items are either time sensitive or they're a legal requirement and we need to get it done by this time. And I'm thinking of that, and I'm trying to think of like, what are things that as board members we're adding and it's causing that to, to not have the focus on what is the most important for the meeting. And I think that what Mr. Cohn shared was a really important point. Like, you have meetings that are shorter, that are efficient, that are focused, but we have to build up to that. And I think that, you know, it's not a zero-sum game, like where we're trying to subtract so much. Like, what are the things that we can balance with the staff that we have, with a vision for a district, for the roadmap? What are the priorities and values? So I think that in looking at this policy and what Trustee Panas explained, I think that a lot of it is just like saying, like, hey, like, if we're not going to keep these attachments, if we can't put these attachments at the times that, you know, that the rest of the agenda is posted, maybe we should actually bring this back at the next regularly scheduled meeting and say, like, this item is going to be pulled because we don't have the items posted on time, so we're going to have it at the next one. I think that would also give the staff that you're mentioning the time to do it and to bring it to us. And like at yesterday's agenda setting, I let you know, these are the things that I think are important to discuss in November 4th, so that it's a heads up. And we have, you know, a planning sheet, we have a document. So I think it's just a matter of really talking about how we can work together, staff and board, to prioritize what are the items that are going to be on the meeting, you know? Mr. Duffy, I think you're muted.
Oh, I might respectfully disagree. I mean, I really do hear you. And I think if we did an audit of all of our items at all of the meetings, it would be interesting to go through and see like what's essential, what's non-essential. You know, especially when you dive into just discussion items for the purposes of discussion. I really, you know, truly believe we're just on rapid fire trying to get through so many board meetings and committee meetings, and these are the same people who are, you know, running your district, supporting all of the schools and leaders. And maybe that's a good exercise for us, maybe at a future retreat, to go through the agenda topics and really talk about, where does this belong? Does this belong in a board meeting? Does this belong in a committee meeting? Does this belong in a Friday letter? I mean, you've seen the Friday letter has grown to 10 to 15 pages. People are putting in tremendous effort on a Friday letter to get tons of information out on a weekly basis, being super transparent. So, you know, I think folks are going hard, and we've definitely burned some folks out, and they have not been able to stay with us over the past couple of years. So I'm all for it, for continuing to have the conversation and figuring out how to do it as well as we can. But I would argue, sort of at the end of the day, I think we have more than we can sustainably do very well. We can do okay, but I don't know that we can do great in this many structures.
Mm-hmm. So I think that, I mean, I want to open up the space right now, the floor, for other fellow board members to speak to what is their priority right now, and see where this leads us in regards to the policy. Trustee Garcia Avila, Trustee Cotton Blake, and Trustee Panas.
I personally have no comments on this item at the moment.
Thank you, Trustee Cotton Blake.
I don't have any comments either. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Garcia Avila. Trustee Panas.
I'll just say that, you know, I think you make a very good point when you say that, like, if it's not ready, maybe we should just shouldn't put it on the agenda. So that's a decision that needs to be made. But it's just, I feel like it leaves us open to criticism, like when we're putting out agendas and materials are changing and no one knows they're changing. So I just feel like we need a standard here, and maybe it isn't a board bylaw. Maybe it's like, if the stuff isn't ready on Friday afternoon, it doesn't go. I mean, either that or we say we're going to have some kind of standard where you get some leeway, but like after that, there is none. And also, anytime something is posted, people need to know if that's changed. And I also don't want to like ignore the part, it's kind of a separate conversation, but about making sure that our public is always aware when we're getting various kinds of reports and findings, et cetera. Making sure they know about that right away. And that certainly makes it easier for board members then to gauge like, how important is this? And instead of, not knowing about it until it shows up any number of months later and it looks uncomplimentary.
Thank you, Trustee Panas. Trustee Panas, so are you suggesting official changes to this policy at this moment or not at this moment?
I guess I'd be willing to make official. I'd be willing to propose language if you want me to, or if you think we want to continue the discussion, I can hold off on proposing official language as well. So whatever the chair's preference is, I'm happy to do that.
I think if you shared, it would be helpful, I think, for Trustee Cotton and Trustee Garcia Avila and for myself, if you would be willing to take kind of like these reflections from the board members present and Superintendent Duffy and just kind of synthesize that. I think that
Sure.
would be helpful.
Okay, I can do that.
Thank you. And I think we can bring it back for discussion at the next governance meeting again.
Sounds
Thank you.
good.
Thank you. And so then we have that was our discussion item D, Board Bylaw 9322, agenda meeting material. So we're going to bring it back with some of the suggested changes, suggestions that were made right now, to take a look at it again and see how we can improve it. And the last discussion item that we have is discussion item E, district holidays. And we can go to public comment. I requested for this item to be added to this agenda as a discussion item because I couldn't find a policy on district holidays besides policies on work and instructional calendar years. But I was curious about, what is the process similar to the facilities renaming and now the school mascots policy that was drafted by Superintendent Duffy. What the process is for creating district holidays, because that was unclear to me. I know that Monday was Indigenous Peoples Day, as is the second Monday of October. And so I know that our schools were, well, not the schools were closed, but there was no school that day, but it wasn't necessarily in honor of Indigenous Peoples Day. So I'm wondering, I know that we had some days in the year that were kind of saved as smoke days. But I just want to know, like, what is the process, or do we have a policy or an official process for creating a district holiday?
Yeah, we have two, we sort of have two processes, right? We have our district calendar, which we build together through collective bargaining with our units, most specifically the teachers union, to determine how we're going to meet the total number of school days we have for the year, which days we take off, which vacation days, etc. We had actually built this past Monday. We have not had this past Monday off historically, but we built it in actually originally as a smoke day because we've had so many years of fires in case we needed extra days. But we also knew that it's a day that other districts have off. So we tried to be thoughtful about that. So if the board wanted to name something a day as an official holiday, the board can do that, but we also need to go to collective bargaining to talk about, making that day official as part of the calendar. So that's sort of how we do it. To build out those calendars.
Thank you for that clarification. And if we can have public comment, and then I'll ask, we'll go into discussion for this. Thank you.
We have one public comment, Mr. President. It's Don Gossen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you again, and I apologize. this isn't about this subject, but I shut myself off on the last subject before I forgot to mention, on your bylaw, somebody ought to proof it. Right after the phrase agenda preparation, I spotted very quickly 2 typos. And for an educational body, I think it's good that we don't misspell words in our official bylaws. I know it's a simple little thing that somebody made a mistake on, but it's easily corrected. Yeah, just revisit it and try to make an example for our young people. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gosney. And we appreciate the feedback. We will look at that to correct any typos. Okay, so I wanted to give the space to everybody who's here right now on the committee. And just, I was wondering if you had any input on district holidays, anything that you want to share. I think Mr. Duffy clarified right now that it's more of a collective bargaining process. And I wanted to know, Mr. Duffy, I guess to a clarifying question too. So for holidays that are still working days, for example, for Cesar Chavez, that's an in-service working day, correct?
Cesar Chavez Day, I'd have to look on our calendar this year. If it is an in-service day, I'm not sure.
I think it's in-service day of learning. And so I think my question earlier, maybe I didn't answer correctly, but it was more toward like even days that are, typical working days, instructional days that are commemorated or after, somebody who has had an impact. Is that also like, for example, with Indigenous Peoples Day? I was just really interested in that one specifically because it's so recent, and I noticed that there was no work, there was no instruction, but it was not commemorated as such, that it was Indigenous Peoples Day. So I know you explained about the smoke day too, and the board talked about that last year at length, but I wanted to kind of set the tone for why my question and my request to have this be a discussion item.
Okay, so I think if I'm understanding you correctly, are you asked sort of shifting the conversation to talk about the teaching of Indigenous Peoples Day and what our expectation is for that?
Not necessarily. I think it's just more of it's designated as a non-instructional day, I believe, but it's not necessarily, it's not addressed as it's Indigenous Peoples Day. So the second Monday of October is off because it's Indigenous Peoples Day. I know that wasn't part of the collective agreement, but
so we would need to do 2 things. We would need to establish through resolution that the second Monday of October is always Indigenous Peoples Day. It is always a district holiday. It is always a no school day, if we wanted to do that. I mean, I'm just saying if we were walking down that process, right? And then we would have to bargain with our labor unit. It's around, okay, so when is the other day? If we're not having school on this day, when is the other day? Because this is now a holiday for us. Some days are national holidays. Some days, you could deem it something locally. So it can be done. We just, would go through that process and determine that is not a day we have school, and then we remake the calendar. So reminder, that the calendars are built out, they can always be amended.
But it would be something that would make sense to do it at the time that the calendars are agreed upon again.
Yes.
Thank you. So trustees Garcia Avila, Cotton Blake, and trustee Panas.
I have no comments.
Thank you. Trustee Cotton Blake.
Yes. So from my understanding of these district holidays, if district holidays are not used in the current year, then they will not be recycled to the next year. They will just be sort of wasted days if they're not labeled to become, district holidays or days off. Sorry about that. My dog died.
That's okay. I'm not sure. Can you say that one more time?
I'll go ahead at the end. Sorry about that.
Okay. I mean, if you're talking about, well, I'll rather have you clarify.
Yes, and yeah, if Trustee Cotton Blake, if it's okay with you, Trustee Panas can share it, and then we can come back to you. Great, awesome. We always love to welcome to our pets into this space. No worries. Trustee Panas?
Thank you, President Hernandez-Chavez. So I really am interested in what you're suggesting here, because if I recall correctly, we actually we started having a resolution about Indigenous Peoples Day, maybe the first year, for 1st October that I was on the board. And you're making a really good point here. Like, maybe the board even passes a resolution about it, but if we take it off, we don't say we're commemorating it for that reason. And, you know, we're so fortunate to have an extremely diverse community. And I think a conversation about what days, you know, if we're going to have holidays, like, which holidays should we have? I think having that conversation with the community is a very empowering conversation for the community. And I don't know if we're going to come down anywhere different than we are now, but like, if we're taking we're not taking Columbus Day off anymore, you know, we're taking Indigenous Peoples Day off. And if we're going to take it off, let's at least acknowledge why we're taking it off. Then, Mr. Duffy, if I recall correctly, not that it can't be adjusted, like, next year's calendar is actually already bargained, correct?
Yep. Yes.
Okay. So in theory, we could change next year's calendar. We could say, like, the following, you know, we're going to start talking about it this year, next year, and the following year. Well, actually, we need to talk about it this year, because next year we'll be bargaining the following year's calendar. So, I mean, if we want to do this, and without having to perhaps upset the schedules of a lot of people who kind of already planned to some extent next year based on the calendar that was bargained, it seems like this is the time to be talking about that. And I personally feel like it's a very worthwhile conversation, and a conversation that honors our community and asks them for their thoughts on who's important to you. And we only have a limited number of these, and how should we use them? So those are my comments. Thank you. And thank you for bringing this up. It's a really important topic for our community. I mean, it really honors our community.
Yeah, thank you, Trustee Panas. I think you made a lot of great points about timing. And I think that is key to this, right? To engage the community, to have a conversation with our labor partners and with everybody involved, and to talk about what it means to have a conversation about, you know, Indigenous Peoples Day and other district holidays too, who are, you know, that are important to our communities. I think actually at our first October meeting on the 7th, which seems like a long time ago, but it was a week ago, we actually passed the resolution in recognition of Indigenous Peoples Day, and we called that out, and we called out the month, and also the second Monday of October as Indigenous Peoples Day. So I think it's already been proclaimed in our resolution, and I think it's happened for a couple of years at least now, maybe more. And so I think that it's just now a matter of really talking about it with the unions and in our collective agreements, with just bargaining agreements, to just say, like, these are going to be some of the things that we want to consider. Is there energy behind commemorating this day and really honoring Indigenous Peoples Day as a district community?
Absolutely. Well, I can begin those conversations with our units as we start getting into calendar, and just report back and keep you posted on where we are.
That would be great. Thank you. And
You're
Trustee Cotton Blake, thank you, Mr. Duffy. Trustee Cotton Blake?
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Sorry about that. So my question is less of a question now, because I was wondering before what the time frame behind, so as the bargaining team is going and finding, adding or having the removal of said district holidays, I was wondering the time frame for the creation of the labels for them, like a Indigenous Peoples Day, whether that's meant to be an Indigenous Peoples Day or to celebrate Indigenous people, or is it just to have a label for said added district holiday? But now I'm hearing that this is something that is concocted far before the district holiday is added and is already embedded in as something that's necessary for commemorating said group of people. And I'm seeing now that there's an extreme amount of integrity behind the decisions that you're making around district holidays. So I appreciate that. And for the clarification, thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Duff.
Yeah, I do think it's a good reminder, though, that sometimes we are moving fast, and we have to make sure we take the time to truly talk about what we're taking the day off for, and really celebrate it, and make sure the activities are done inside of school, and folks really understand it's not just a day off. It's a lot of thought has gone into why we have this day.
Yeah. Thank you, Superintendent Duffy. I think that we're ready now to move on to the action item that we have for our meeting, and then move on to setting the next meeting dates. So our one and only action item today is action item A, recommendation to establish a racial equity community oversight council via Healthy Richmond's LCP recommendation. And I know that Ms. Garza Carrillo joined us.
So she has her hand up for public comment. So we have 2 public comment there. And I don't have much on this item. I'm happy to just introduce it briefly and then, move to public comment.
We can do that. And if we can actually have, this, the LCP recommendations from Healthy Richmond, the third recommendation, number 3, on the screen, that would be great. So we could actually have the visual, and if we can add it to the minutes too. I'd be happy to forward that if needed to Mr. Jordan or to you, Mr. Duffy, or if you have it already and want to forward that.
We can pull it up. It's just going to take a minute.
Great. And if we can have, if you would like to give the brief overview and then invite Ms. Garza Carrillo to share a bit about it as well, and then we can have public comment, just so everybody has the information. Thank you.
Okay. So as most folks know, on this call, Healthy Richmond submitted a number of recommendations to go along with the district learning continuity plan. One of them was that the district adopt a racial oversight committee, and we discussed that really briefly at the full board meeting, and shared with the full board that we discussed it in governance and that we do plan to move forward with it. We didn't really hear any board resistance to that idea. So we're kind of coming back here to formalize the recommendation, which would go back to the full board. I think there's a couple of questions about where that committee would live. And that's probably worth discussing. That's sort of where we are.
Thank you, Mr. Duffy. And if
give me 1 second to grab that, but feel free if you want to move to public comment while I pull that up.
Great. Can we actually get Ms. Garza Carrillo to be able to share a bit before we go to public comment?
Sure, we can have her promoted to, would you like her promoted to panelist?
Yes, please, yeah. And I think she can begin while you're setting up the screen share. Thank you. Welcome, Ms. Garza Carrillo.
Hello. Good evening, everyone. Nice to see you all. Yeah, so I had been listening to some of the discussion from the last 2 governance committee meetings. So I wanted to sort of address some of the questions and dialogue that have come up in previous meetings. One, the question I think at the last meeting was, what would the council be doing, or what would its charge be? And the proposed council would really be working to coordinate with this body, the governance committee, to develop the district-wide diversity, equity, and inclusion policy, which I know there's been discussion about that in previous meetings as well as the anti-racism, anti-bias framework. But primarily the idea or the concept behind this council would be that it would support students who want to influence change in their schools and parents of primarily Black and ELL students in the district. And those individuals would help to develop a community process that moves them from passive sort of participants of surveys and town halls to leaders who are active in the development of racial equity policies and practices. So once the board has a DEI policy in place, then at the board's direction, the governance committee would draft, I would imagine, administrative regulations and codify what is in that DE policy to become the district's practice. And the role of the council then is to really more long-term address and measure the academic gaps on a quarterly basis with key decision makers. And I think of those as the chief academic officer, the directors of the African American Academic Achievement office, as well as the new positive school climate director, who's going to hopefully be joining soon, the superintendent, UTR principals, community engagement director, to really see kind of where things are moving. And I think Trustee Hernandez-Jarvis, you talked about the fact that there would need to be very specific indicators that we would then need to see progress towards over time, so that we could see that school families are over time meeting the racial equity goals that are set district-wide. The other thing that this council would do would be to ensure that budget decisions are aligned with the results of the discussions around equity and equity goals and outcomes. There was a question about who the council would be working with. Again, we see this being institutionalized by the governance committee as a standalone committee, and it would report to the governance committee and to the board. We acknowledge that, and I think Mr. Duffy mentioned that that there are equity policies or recommendations really that exist within resolutions, like positive school climate and ASAT resolutions. So it would be important that this council be informed by those documents, and again, coordination with the appropriate directors. That council would also need to coordinate with the County Office of Ed and high schools or schools within the district that are already moving forward racial equity efforts. And then the council would also be working with representative leaders from the following district advisory committees, so ASAT and PLC, and I think the community engagement team would be important for them to work with, a representative from UTR. So, different folks that would need to be consulted with along the way. And then the other piece I think that came up was, what's the timeline and the action steps? And I know Trustee Hernandez-Jarvis, you talked about the need for timeline and action steps so that the DEI policy is actually actionable. So from my standpoint, because this recommendation did not get funded under the LCP, it's going to be important that money gets secured to launch this council. And I was listening to the discussion earlier and Superintendent Duffy mentioning, like, if you're going to add one more thing, how are you going to do this? This recommendation was crafted in such a way that it's a real collaboration with the community. So the district staff isn't doing this alone. This isn't one more thing on the plate. You would be, for probably the first time, really actively working with organizations that have been working on racial equity. I know Trustee Phillips mentioned that it would be good to have an outside consultant. For all that to happen, you do need to have funding. And so tonight, I really commit to trying to secure funding to launch this council so that there can be the needed support wrapped around it. I am going to have a few meetings with a couple of different foundations, and I'm willing to do that. That's going to take probably October and hopefully not too far into November, so that by December we can start partnering with organizations and recruiting parents and students. I really know that students do want to participate in this kind of transformation of their schools and their district, and often just don't have the venue or the pipeline to get there. So we would work hard to really recruit students across the district who want to participate in this, as well as parents. And, you know, we have existing infrastructures for parent engagement across the district. So the SSEs, the ELACs, the PTAs, the APACs are all places where we could recruit. We would need to provide some training and support to those students and parents so that they would understand where all the racial equity policies, existing policies and practice language exists in the district. We'd have to hire a regional expert, maybe Race Forward or another regional expert to help us think through the structure. And then I think the other piece would be to really have the council work hand in hand with this governance committee to develop a community-driven process to hear directly from students and parents. And as we know, as in this last quarter, we've had to move everything online. And the silver lining in that is that people are really getting engaged and civically involved at all levels. Many more people are coming to your board meetings. Many more people are coming to even the county board of supervisor meetings and the city council meetings. So we would really engage. I think this committee talked about doing listening sessions this fall, but we would really engage in December, at least an initial set of online platform venues so that people, teachers, parents, and students could begin having some of the conversation around a DEI policy. And then in January, following up with probably some additional sessions, given that we know December is pretty busy with holidays. And then really bringing, having maybe some other modes for people to communicate. So maybe students or parents could meet with council members in weekly office hour sessions, or some way to engage in one-on-one phone calls or one-on-one Zoom meetings. So that by the end of January, the council would bring recommendations back to this governance committee for dialogue and hopefully provide some initial insights around a DEI policy. So anyway, you know, that's just some brainstorming, but the idea is that you broaden the discussion early and you build the ability for particularly students in the LCAP student populations. And we were thinking even students in underperforming schools in the district, as well as parents, to really be active participants and leaders in this discussion. So that's just some of my thoughts in answering some of the questions that have been brought up. But I really want to underscore this with the superintendent, that this isn't asking, you know, your team, even the community engagement team, to do this alone. This is really about active partnership with, you know, staff from your local organizations who have expertise around racial equity policy work, and wrapping that sort of staff time together with the district so that it isn't an overwhelming task, but that we do move in a very conscientious way. So anyway, those are some of my thoughts.
Thank you so much, Ms. Garza Carrillo, for the overview and all of the details you provided, ranging from the type of council that it would be, who would be on it, who it would report to, the funding, and for your commitment to help launch this. I would like to open up the opportunity now for members of the public to share their feedback with us before we move into our discussion. Mr. Duffy, do we have public comment?
We have one, Jamil Saleh.
Hi, I'm wondering when will there be, is the governance committee looking at approving this proposal as is, or is there ever going to be a step where it goes from what was proposed to what the governance committee is recommending to the full board? It seems like at some point there's the West Contra Costa logo and the big draft across it because we're taking ownership of it. Or is the process that we're just going to adopt this document, which this committee has not provided publicly, as the full recommendation to the board? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Saleh, for that question and public comment. I think that for clarification, since this document has been seen by the full board, and if this committee does want us to move forward with it, we can make the recommendation of how to proceed if it is basing it off specifically of this document, or making the recommendation for the board to consider the recommendation by Healthy Richmond for the Racial Equity Community Oversight Council, which is their third recommendation, number 3. And having, we can have specific wording in the motion of how we want to move this forward to go to the board, if we want this to be the establishment of the council, and then have further discussion there. I think that we'll have a more clear picture after we have discussion tonight. So if we can begin with Trustee Garcia Avila or Trustee Cotton Blake, and then Trustee Panas and myself.
All right, thank you. I'm definitely in 100% support of this, of the Racial Equity Community Oversight Council and everything they're pushing for at the moment. I'm here, full support. Thank you, and thank you for the presentation.
Thank you, Trustee Cotton Blake. Trustee Garcia Avila.
Currently, I don't have any comments, but also 100% in support of this. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Garcia Avila. Trustee Panas.
Thank you, President Hernandez-Jarvis. In my mind, there's a lot of questions we still need to answer here. I love this idea. I'm very excited about this idea. I think there's a lot of unanswered questions that I'd feel better about if we could get them answered before we take this to the board. So Ms. Garza Carrillo, I'm wondering, so as you talk about, you spoke about working to involve particularly students and members of the public in putting together listening sessions and other means to provide the foundation for creation of a DEI policy. How many, I mean, what's your thought about how many people would be involved in that process?
So, I mean, since this is a district-wide policy, you would have to really have adequate representation from each of the school families. So I know when we worked on the positive school climate, Superintendent Duffy might remember better than I, but those initial working group sessions, I think had 40 or 50 people in them, including representation from
more than that,
at
probably.
least. Yeah, it kind of waned towards the end when it became more internal, but I do think if it's district-wide, you would have to have representation from each school family. And you would need to have representation, as I said before, from the Parent Leadership Council. So the parent advisory, joint parent advisory groups would also need to be represented. So And then I listed out, you know, a number of different key staff that may come in, you know, to consult, but I do think, you know, having UTR there, having district staff representation, the directors of Positive School Climate, and the African American Student Achievement Office would also be important. So I think, yeah, I think at least 50 or 60 folks in total would have to be involved. And, you know, it's also going to be important to have the students as well as parents be part of co-designing what kind of community tool is used during the engagement sessions. And then I think having other ways for community to participate. Not everybody wants to participate via Zoom. So what are some other ways that parents and students can be engaged?
So that was actually another.
Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, you know, when LCAP first started in 2014, we had suggested that the civics classes or social studies classes have a section in them that dealt specifically with LCAP. And at the time, you know, we were hoping that LCAP could serve as a way to get students actively engaged over the period of time LCAP has been in place. I still think that's a great idea. You know, can we, you know, really draw upon existing curriculum in the high schools in particular to get students who are interested in this kind of policy discussion.
Okay, and you mentioned specifically some place I was going to go, which is like maybe not everybody wants to do Zoom meetings. Given our current pandemic, I'm wondering if you have other thoughts about ways to engage the public beyond that.
Well, I've been very intrigued in watching Richmond Revolution do their engagement. They've used Facebook, they've used Zoom, they've used, you know, different mediums, and I think it'll have to be a combination of things. I also think for some, it may just be one-on-one phone calls with key, you know, folks that maybe don't have the technology to come to online venues.
Yeah.
But so I think we have to be creative about it.
Okay. And I had been kind of wondering about the model of the school climate committee, and you mentioned that very explicitly. It's my recollection, and I'm not meaning to be critical or saying that it's a bad idea. That took, I just have this recollection in my mind working through that body, out of which I think we got a very good recommendation, took a long time. I mean, months and months and months. Do I recall that correctly? Or does that timeline, I guess I'd say, like, does the timeline that happened there kind of match the timeline that you just outlined?
It does not, but I think that we've learned quite a bit over time around, you know, the different resolutions that have been developed. And let me just say, those resolutions are not policy, I don't believe. And so I think what has been suggested is that a policy be developed that incorporates some of the existing resolution language, but and I know you brought a template from another district for review. So I think right now there's a lot of energy, particularly among the students, to really look proactively at developing a policy. And so I think, you know, coming with some sort of template back to the governance committee, or starting with a framework, maybe document from the governance committee that we then take, you know, and engage with the community to get to build out more specific language and content within that template. I don't think it's going to take as long as the Positive School Climate resolution.
Okay, thank you. So my only hesitation here is I mean, this is a proposal, and we can't be, I'm not expecting that we have everything nailed down. I'm really curious to see more specificity on how much district staff time might be required here. Given our COVID world, I don't know that you need district facilities, which kind of makes that less complicated. And I don't know if Mr. Duffy would want to weigh in on, I mean, if there's complications in that we haven't thought about in terms of an outside organization like Healthy Richmond, basically funding and running the bulk of the work here as opposed to it being district driven. Because obviously, for example, the school climate, which is just like one way to do it, that was entirely a district initiative in which community partners participated. And you're describing something a bit different here. In a sense, it's an initiative that's run by community partners in which the district participates, if I understand correctly.
Well, no, what I described was a hybrid of the two, meaning that it's not going to lay only on the district staff's shoulders that and you know, sap up all of their time, that it would be done in partnership. So it would be organizations like that would be working in a collective way with the district. So it would be a hybrid. I would think it would need to be that.
Okay. And if you, let me say, like you spoke, like you seem to have some confidence that you would be able to go find the funding for this. Are you looking for 6 months of funding, of a year of funding, of 2 years of funding? I don't really, I don't really look at the, I don't understand what the long-term vision is really what my question.
Yeah, so foundations usually do 1-year grants, with the exception of, you know, a few initiatives. They may entertain a 1 to 3 year, depending on you know, the foundation. So the best case scenario would be to get 3 years of funding. Worst case would be 1 year funding. And then you have to, you know, run and find additional funding, or perhaps this gets incorporated somehow into the more full LCAP process down the road.
Okay. And do you have a guess as to how much funding annual funding you would be going for here?
No, I mean, what we had proposed in the recommendation was 350K. You know, because of the pandemic, many foundations are pivoting towards, you know, crisis funding at the moment. And so, but there also is a great interest in racial equity work because of what's happening in our country. And so I do think, you know, it's going to be, you know, not necessarily, you know, a tough pitch to make to a foundation, but the amount of money that they may have available, you know, we may end up with a 1 year of funding because of COVID.
Okay, thank you very much for your questions.
Thank you, Trustee Panas. And thank you, Ms. Garza Carrillo, also for answering those questions. I think that Trustee Panas asked a lot of the questions that I was thinking about too, in terms of funding, ongoing funding, and just the structure, you know, that was recommended in the proposal. And so I'm really curious to just kind of think about what the next steps can be, if this is something we want to bring back to governance, to look at it, you know, as not as a different proposal, but how can we look at it with a timeline, with a budget, like the amount of participants, or if it's something that we can work on getting to the board at the November 4th meeting as a recommendation to establish this and to establish the council and have these pieces of information that Trustee Panas asked about and that you shared with us put together there. I kind of want to get more thinking on that from Mr. Duffy. how do you envision that too? And just really emphasizing the recommendations focus on having this be kind of a hybrid partnership. So it's not just on the district adding more things to staff, but how is it leveraging the leadership and the organizations in our community to do this work?
President Hernandez-Jarvis, do you mind if I make one final comment?
No, please go ahead. Thank you.
The way I'm looking at this now, from what I've been listening to from all of you, is this program, this community council is an investment into our community, essentially. And the way I'm looking at each of these points, it's a very versatile program in which it attacks a lot of key points that we've heard complaints about time and time again when we've been on past board meetings. Things such as learning loss, looking at distance learning programs. A lot of people are concerned about what this is going to look like, when COVID's going to end, when we're going to be able to get back to how we were. Looking at improved services for foster youth, English learners, low-income students, and the whole sense of equity behind this. And essentially giving students the resources that they're losing during this time and have been losing for quite a while. If this program works the way that it is being presented to us, this is more than a return on the investment that we'd be giving into the program itself. In the long run, if this is working, especially towards bringing equity to our low income and underserved students, that improvement in anything from SATs to simply grades to attendance, all this stuff as it builds up, obviously will be an extreme return on investment, looking at attendance itself and how much of our budget that makes up in a year. And I'm very for this program and to see if this will work.
Thank you, Trustee Cotton Blake. I think that you called out something very important about it being an investment and having direct impacts throughout our school district. Thank you for that. Mr. Duffy, I think you wanted to also share something right now.
Sure. Well, I guess this is my first official time disagreeing with Trustee Cotton Blake, but I guess it's got to happen sometime. So here's my concern. And I know, like, even me saying the word concern might suddenly seem like this work is not important. But I raise the concern because I think it's so important. I worry about the dilution of the work. Because as Trustee Caden Cotton Blake explained, he really saw this as a way to help us get better, more equitable outcomes for our students. But we have done this multiple times. We adopted a positive climate resolution and it said that would be the driver of this type of equity. We adopted an African American resolution with very specific things. We said that would be the driver. The wellness policy, the Office of African American Student Achievement, the ASAT, the Friday PD, the ethnic studies work, the CTE resolution, a huge disproportionality committee made up of multiple stakeholders, a deep focus on DLI. And my worry is we cannot create cohesion and coherence in the system. And then what's going to result is we look like, it literally looks like we do not care. And that's what comes off, as opposed to seeing like, these are disparate parts that we are really struggling to bring together. So that's my concern. And, you know, I don't think we have space to say we're going to have another group that's going to then make another set of recommendations where we haven't really even had the time to like get the things we've said going. That's my worry. I mean, I'm up for it, don't get me wrong, but I want to be like transparent about my concern in terms of implementation, so that things really come together and they don't stay siloed, or folks aren't like, what happened to that? We were doing that, then what happened to this? So that's where I'm at, you know, and I think I'm just very mindful of it because the work is so important and so big. I want to make sure it feels really aligned and powerful. And if we move forward with it, that's what's going to be key to me, is like how we create alignment and coherence. So we're really talking the same language about a number of things. And some of the things that we have started, we're finding ways to let them grow before we move on from them.
Thank
So
you.
with that, yeah, so, you know, however we can get some specifics around that, I think it would be helpful.
Thank you, Superintendent Duffy. And I think, you know, I would like to just, you know, share that I disagree with you. I agree with you, and I also disagree. I agree that there's a lot of parts already in the process or actively working. But I don't know if you recall, we kind of started having this discussion, this conversation around DEI work a while ago. And last year, you know, I was suggesting like we need to have an office of equity that actually looks at this, not as an ombudsman, as having complaints or having things that are not as active. But I really feel like the work is disconnected because we don't have a focus of it at the core. We don't have, how do we know that this group is not going to work if we've never actually had it? Like what does it look like to re-envision what actually having a group that puts it all together so it's not disjointed to make the DEI work? Because you mentioned the ASAT resolution, the positive school climate resolution, and again, those are resolutions, right? So the point of it is to have a DEI policy, right? To have the racial equity work be ongoing and at the core, not seen as like an addition, or how can I put it, as almost like an annoyance or a luxury, you know, added. Because I think the point of it is to not create more work that is just for the sake of having work, but to actually help to move the work forward that's already happening and have that equity lens that we talk about. But we don't actually, you know, have it across the board for everything. And I know that, you know, there's multiple things happening on Fridays now, but a lot of that was reactive. And I think we need to be aware of that it was a lot of reactive measures that were taken. It wasn't something that happened organically because we saw the need, and it was something that was from an outside and external pressure. And so I want to call that out to our attention, that as we look to specify how we're going to do this work, how to make a hybrid partnership, how to not make it an additional layer of burden, but actually at the very center of the core of the fabric of our district. How do we create that? How do we put the joints together so that it is an investment, like Trustee Kate Cotton Blake said? Like, how do we make it so that it's not seen as like additional work, but essential work that then things get built on? And we can disagree in that, but I just want us to have an idea, a shared understanding around how we want to move forward with this, so that when it comes to the board, it is successful. And we have identified budget projections, potential funding, potential timelines, potential, you know, structure of the council, and reporting to the governance committee and reporting to the board. So yeah, I think that, you know, it's getting a little bit late, and I want us to make sure that everybody has a voice right now, and that we move forward with ending the meeting in an efficient time and setting the next meeting dates. But I just want to give, you know, another chance to Trustee Panas if you have anything else that you want to add to this too, or if you have suggestions of how we can proceed forward too.
You know, I guess something the Trustee Cotton Blake said really made me realize, or able to put into words, an issue that I've had as we've talked for several meetings about DEI. I mean, I've been on the governance committee for 3 years, well, almost 4 now. And as I've thought about DEI, I've tried to figure out, how are we physically going to get a DEI policy written? You know, I've submitted some samples and we've talked about it, and other people have had suggestions, but I've never felt like we had a clear idea on how we're going to literally get to the point. I mean, tomorrow we're not going to write a DEI policy. You know, first we have to do a lot of work to lay all the groundwork to create that policy. But like, what I'm seeing here is an opportunity to do that in a way that I haven't seen it before. And when I look at other things, like I've tried to do on the governance committee, some successful or some not, this is big. And I think it's very important. And to me, this looks like a way to do it. that's not like, I'm not saying like, I have to say like, I'm not sure I want this to go to the board the next meeting. Maybe we need to have another meeting here, but to me, this looks like the best opportunity I've seen. Maybe others will come along, I don't know, but I want to get the DEI policy going. And this looks like a great opportunity to make that happen. So that's kind of my final comments, I think, on the subject for the evening.
Thank you, Trustee Panas. I agree with that. I think that I want to make sure that we craft what we bring to the board in a way that makes sense and that is clear and that has all of the points that are the most important to get it to have the support of the board, right? And I think that at the last meetings when we talked about this in the LCP, there was an energy around, you know, different ways of looking at this, but essentially getting at the core of the work needing to be done for racial equity district-wide. So I think that we can bring this back for governance one more time, and then if we feel that we have a plan to move it forward to the board at that point, I think that it would make sense to take it to the board.
President Hernandez-Jarvis, do you mind if I make one final comment?
Please go ahead, Trustee Cotton Blake.
Okay, thank you. I just want to do a quick response to what Superintendent Duffy said. I actually completely agree with what he said, but at the same time, completely agree with what I said. And what I mean by that is that I acknowledge the first thing that I notice is those big four that are listed there are extremely vague and wide topics and can easily be a program and a council that is spread thin in the sense that reaching at each of these different topics are extremely important, but when you get lost in each of the topics, no work gets done, but money is continuing to be allocated towards the programs. And I understand that has been an issue as you listed off the different programs that have existed in the past that have been towards these same goals. So the new question that I posed to Ms. Roxanne Garza herself is, what is the council planning to do different that other programs have not done in the past? Are you willing to go door to door to interact with these parents and these students? Are you willing to allocate funds towards social media outreach towards these parents and students? Are you willing to take those steps? And are you planning to take those steps in actually getting this work done rather than becoming spread too thin in a sense?
If I can answer, I think that is a perfect question. And I would answer yes to your question. We would have, as I said before, we would have to really figure out how to involve parents and students. And for some parents, you know, they have never felt engaged by this district. So there are parents who maybe there was district-led processes for them to get involved and they never really believed that their voice mattered. And so it's really getting to parents or students who really haven't felt part of a process. And I would say to Superintendent Duffy's comment that you've had all of these different efforts. Yes, you have, but you have not included students and parents as leaders within those different processes. It has primarily been district staff, some organizational leaders, but it has not been an effort that really puts students and parents at the forefront of helping to lead and co-design these processes. And so I think that's the difference in this process than all those others that were mentioned. So yeah, all of what you had mentioned, having creative ways to engage with parents, being able to reach out through the SCOWs at each school, being able to reach out through larger groups like the ASAT for parents, maybe African American parents in a school in Richmond who don't feel heard, and using those relationships to bring them to the table so that they can be heard. Or students, I know that both the trustees on this call have relationships with students who do care about these issues, that would want to get engaged, and it's engaging them through those networks. So it's a relationship-based effort and would have to be a comprehensive approach.
All right, thank you for that response. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Cotton Blake, for that question, and Ms. Garza Carrillo for your thorough response as well. So I think what I would like to propose is to have this item come back to us to governance as an action item again. And I think that Mr. Duffy and Trustee Panas and feel free to, chime in as well. But I think that having the conversation that just happened about this specific item, my key takeaways are that we need to have a clear understanding of the structure of the council and how many people in approximation, the budget piece, the projection, and the timeline, and how it could work in partnership with district, with community members and community organizations, so that we can have a clear plan to take forward to the board as we recommend the establishment of the Racial Equity Community Oversight Council. So if we can do that for the next meeting, I think that would help us. And Trustee Panas, feel free to also chime in for this.
No, I like that plan. I think that's good. I think you raised a lot of valid points.
Thank you. And thank you to Trustees and Trustee Garcia Avila for that, for your input as well. Thank you to also Ms. Garza Carrillo for being available, for having the thorough explanations and responses as well. Really appreciate it, to help us move this work forward. Thank you. So with that, we are going to wrap up this item, and that's going to be our only action item today. So we have Governance Committee meeting dates for our next 2 meetings. If we can set those for November and December, that would be great. For November, I was looking at the second week. The second week would be the Thursday, November 12th. We could also do Tuesday if that works better for your schedules.
There's a DLCAPS meeting on November 10th.
November 10th, thank you. So November 10th is off the table.
Or unless we met earlier, and I don't know if that would fit in your schedule.
Mm-hmm. If it's earlier, it likely wouldn't fit.
Yeah.
During a
DLCAPS is at 6:30.
There's a safety committee on the 12th now, Thursday.
Do we want to do it on Wednesday then? Wednesday, November 11th?
That would work for me.
That works for me. We don't have a board meeting that day.
Excuse me, that's a Veterans Day holiday, so that's a non-work day for staff.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Haney. Do we want to?
Monday the 9th?
Monday the 9th can work, yeah. There's no DLI meeting that day, right?
No, there's a CBNC meeting earlier, and we have agenda setting till 5:30.
On Monday?
Mm-hmm.
We can do, we can have it after agenda setting if that's fine.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so then we're setting it for November 9th. Monday, November 9th at 5:30. And we can try to maybe begin agenda setting 10 minutes earlier, so we have a 10-minute space between the end of agenda setting and governance.
Okay.
And then the following meeting after that, in December, so we have our 2 board meetings, December 9th and December, no, I'm sorry. Oh yes, December 9th and December 16th. So then do we want to meet December 10th? Would Thursday work?
That would work for me.
Would that work for everybody as well?
Thursday, December 10th.
Okay.
Yeah, there's DLCAP Tuesday, board meeting Wednesday. Actually, yeah, that's fine. What time?
5:30? if that still works with everybody for December 10th.
Yes.
Thank you. So then our next meetings will be on Monday, November 9th at 5:30 p.m. And then for December, it will be Thursday, December 10th at 5:30 p.m. Okay, so those are all of our meeting items. And before we adjourn, if I can ask Mr. Duffy, I think that Trustee Garcia Avila and Trustee Cotton Blake went to check in. So if we can stay after the meeting, that would be great.
Sorry, I didn't hear you.
If we are available to stay after the meeting for 5 to 10 minutes, that would be great. So we can check in with Trustee Garcia Avila and Trustee Cotton Blake.
Oh, sure.
Thank you. Great. Okay. So then, Trustee Panas, did you have any closing remarks that you want to make?
No. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate the community's input, and particularly our trustees who are currently students. Thank you so much for your thoughts. Very, very helpful.
Thank you so much, Trustee Panas. So our meeting is adjourned. And if Trustee Cotton Blake, Trustee Garcia Avila have any comments they would like to make as we move to adjourn the meeting? Thank you. Thank you both. So our meeting is adjourned at 8:06. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you again on Wednesday.
I am leaving.